Hello and welcome back to Raised by Giants. Good to see everyone in the chat. Welcome everyone, any moderators and channel members out there, and to anyone that's listening to the replay. Thanks for joining us. Also, if you're listening on the audio only on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hello and welcome. Thanks for listening. Check all of the links in the description for all of my social media and my documentary links on Amazon and Tubi, as well as my guest links. Just hit the more button underneath the title of this video and it'll bring you down to the drop down so you can get all of the links to my guest information and all of my information. And our guest today, speaking of guest, is the host of The Secret Teachings, author, researcher, veteran radio host, good friend of mine, Ryan Gable. Welcome back to the show, my friend.
Hey, Ryder, thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Well, we're talking planes, trains, and automobiles here today, Ryan, because it is getting really strange, really weird. Did you see this? The Navy, the Mexican Navy ship last week.
Yes, I did.
2 dead after a ship strikes the Brooklyn Bridge, snapping masts and injuring crew members. And this was a Mexican naval sailing ship, which that just, hit me because I'm like, did we not have almost the identical thing just happen like last year, which was the Baltimore Bridge whenever the ship supposedly lost power? And well, CNN is reporting that it lost power twice before the crash, and then it collapsed the Baltimore Bridge. Like, what's the deal with these ships and these vessels? And if you take it back even further, okay, if you go back to around the beginning of 2020 in the Evergreen, do you remember the Evergreen ship that was stuck in the canal for like over a month? The cargo ship?
I recall that to a very small degree, that particular story.
Yeah, this was a really big deal whenever it happened because nobody could figure out how the ship got stuck in the canal. And it was a huge cargo ship. And this was like around the time that, you know, during 2020 when all of the cargo ships were just lined up on in Long Beach in California because they said that there wasn't enough people to process all of the food. I don't know if you remember any of this, but I remember it because I went to the beach in Long Beach during this period of time, and there was like 30 cargo ships that was just placed out there for like a month. They didn't move, just like right off the coast there in Southern California. And then this Evergreen ship, it's just so weird. And then you have the submarine explosion going down to see the Titanic, and we haven't even got into the train derailments and the plane crashes and the helicopter crashes yet. It's just so strange. It seems like that they're trying to hit every mode of transportation here, Ryan. And I'm interested to get your thoughts on it because I know that you've covered a lot of this. You've been doing this for a really long time, and you normally cover these types of events. But whenever you kind of line them all up, it seems like since 2020, we've had more accidents, more helicopter crashes, more plane crashes, more boat accidents than it seems like that we've ever had before. Now, maybe someone could say, oh, well, it's always been happening like this. They just haven't reported it. I don't know. What's your thoughts?
Well, I like to look at all of the different angles. So certainly that's the most common story, is that it's all sort of random and that there's no conspiracy and that there's no pattern. It's just happening and that's how things are. Then there's the opposite extreme, which is that there's some shadowy cabal that is orchestrating all of this, even when we're talking about very small planes, private jets that might crash. We're talking about small boats as well as big boats and big planes and trains as well, and automobiles and everything else. That's the opposite extreme, that there's some giant conspiracy. I don't really buy either, and I don't really like this theme or this motif on social media where you see I think it's a hashtag even that says they don't want us to fly or they don't want us to travel, and that how that has something to do with plane crashes and train derailments and whatnot. It's one of those things for me anyway, it's one of those things that I feel like is a kind of rhetoric. It's a form of frankly, I think it's a form of propaganda, and I think the algorithm drives that. And I think when you believe either one of those extremes, not that there might not be something suspicious going on in one case or another, but when you believe one of those two extremes, you don't ask questions or consider additional evidence. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. There's no doubt that the Baltimore Bridge incident or the Francis Scott Key Bridge incident was not just a big incident because of the size of the boat and the bridge and the complexity of rebuilding something like that, but also because of the timing of it and because of the relationship that that incident had with what occurred a couple of days later, and that was the partial eclipse. I'm sure you remember the partial solar eclipse. So
Yes.
that took place within the same, what, 10-day window. And something that seems unrelated, but is, I think, a part of what could be considered an occult or Charles Fortean pattern here is that the eclipse involved NASA performing what was openly admitted to be a scientific ritual where they fired rockets with sensors and other components into the eclipse, essentially into the eclipse, into that direction of the sky during the eclipse to gather data. And they called it a pep. And a pep in the mythology was a serpent that encompasses, that coils around the barge or the boat of Ra, the sun god in the sky. And Epep is the serpent that consumes the sun. That's what causes the eclipse. It's a story that represents a natural phenomenon. Of course, it's not literally a serpent, and that to me is a very occult underlying theme. Is that you have this bridge collapse, you have this material, the bridge wrapped around this barge, and then a couple of days later, you have the APEP ritual, the science experiment by NASA. And in the mythology, it is a pep that wraps himself around the barge. So to me, that's an interesting story. And to me, that is a perhaps occult pattern. But I will also say that if we're going to look at the statistical data from 2022, 2023, 2024, not so much for 2025, but both in the United States and then also internationally, plane incidents are actually statistically down. In 2023, it was 0.80 per 1.26 million flights, which was an all around improvement from 1.30 out of 1.26 million flights. So overall, there have actually been less plane crashes. The fatality risk when there is a plane crash has also improved substantially from 0.11 out of the same number of crashes to 0.03 out of the same number, 1.26 million. So you have less crashes internationally. That includes the US, it's global, and you have less fatalities when there is an incident. Of course, you have different definitions between crashes, accidents, incidents, et cetera. There's different definitions of these things. But overall, the global airline uh, rates of crash, the rates of people being injured or dying, and even departure accident rates have plummeted. Departure accident rates have plummeted from 2.94 per million in 2019 to 1.87 as of 2023. So everything is technically, statistically safer, less prone to disaster, less prone to people dying, less prone to there being accidents that might not destroy a plane or kill people, but maybe cripples an airline or delays flights. These things are actually statistically happening less often. Now, with that being said, that's global. And if you looked in the United States, you looked at the statistical data here, it's about the same. It's not really any more or any less. However, you can create the image by focusing the cameras and the pins and the radios on those crashes or those plane incidents or aviation incidents, or the train derailments, or the boat incidents. And you can do that intentionally, or it becomes a byproduct of the algorithm. If you go to social media, as you and your whole audience knows, if you're listening here on YouTube right now and you type something in, video games, you maybe look up GTA 6 and you watch a couple of videos. Obviously, the next time you get on YouTube, it's going to recommend other game videos. And when you start to see a boat incident here, you see a plane crash there, what do you think the algorithm is going to show you? It's going to show you more boat incidents, more plane crashes, things that you might not otherwise see if there wasn't that naval ship that hit the bridge, or if there wasn't a plane that crashed into San Diego, killing the music executive. I think his name was Dave Shapiro. If there wasn't these high profile cases that just might kind of fall into the news cycle. And if you're offered 5 news stories and one of them's about plane crashes, one of them's about dogs, and one of them's about something else, and people watch and listen and click on and comment and whatnot on the plane crash, well, that's what the outlets are going to recognize as that's popular. That's what people want to see and hear. And so they're going to report more about that. And in fact, I mean, I went to film school and we had a whole class on how they, we had I think we had a 35 millimeter class, which was more so film, but we had a film class specifically for radio and TV, more so for TV, but production, like production in a studio. And we went through the professional, daily steps of how they sit together in a room and they get the hand out from the main office and they give a list of things that they want to cover, sometimes based on advertisers, sometimes based on what the I guess the head corporate boss is telling them to cover, and then they just distribute that out to all of the different outlets. So you might sit down one day and they give you a paper that says today's the big issue is plane crashes, tomorrow the big issue is the Diddy scandal, tomorrow, the day after that rather, is going to be Epstein, the day after that's going to be cute puppy dogs. And so at some level you can obviously artificially create a narrative. In other ways it's just about revenue and profit, and in other ways it's just people that I think are quite frankly delusional to think that there's nothing ever suspicious, and then to think that everything is so suspicious that there's some grand conspiracy. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, and I think it's important to take these things on a case by case basis. Again, there's last thing, but there's no doubt that the plane crash with the helicopter was suspicious. And in fact, I don't think that that was an accident, but that doesn't mean that I think everything else is also intentional or not an accident, or is an accident, or it doesn't. Just because I believe one thing doesn't mean that I have to believe all the other things. We should be taking things on a case by case basis and looking at the statistical data. I should add one more thing. I think you'll appreciate this, Ryder. I've There's a couple of people on X, big accounts, who have posted things like this. They don't want you to fly. This is what's happening. And then I'll post the federal statistics about plane crashes. And these people will block me, or they'll attack me and say that you don't want the truth. And I'm sitting there looking, it's like, no, no, this is the statistical data. It shows that plane crashes statistically are down. What this person is doing is profiting in the same way that the mainstream news is profiting by pushing those stories. And the mainstream news there's no underlying conspiracy. It's just a horrible plane crash, and that gets attention. People want to watch that and click on it. It's morbid. And then the people like, say, Concerned Citizen, for example, on X, that person and I do not get along because every time they post some nonsense, like there's fog everywhere and it's killing people, it's all over the world. And then I'm in the place where they say the fog is and there's no fog. And then I say that to the person, and then they have an issue with it. It's like they're just profiteers. So I think we need to be a little bit more.
Dang, bro, I almost forgot about the fog, dude. There was like 3 of them, like, that was back to back to back. It was the solar eclipse is gonna turn everyone into zombies. The emergency broadcast signal was gonna turn everybody into zombies. The fog was then getting everybody's, it was like 3 things, like, that all happened in a very short amount of time, and, like, none of them ended up happening. And that's what I was, kind of thinking. I'm like, "Okay, well, it's probably not that these things are happening more," just like what you mentioned. They're not happening more, they're just being reported on more, like, they're getting more attention, they're being put out there more. It's kinda like that. I think it was Marilyn Manson that said one time that, violence and hate has always been there. It's just being more televised now. And that makes a lot of sense when you take it into consideration, like all of these different things. It's being pushed out more, it's being propagandized more. And but I don't know what the reason is for that. It's not like there isn't enough things going on, but we do have like a 24-hour type of news cycle. So I guess there's only so many stories that you can do on puppy dogs and the war in Iran and the war in not Iran, sorry, in Ukraine and the war in Israel. There's only so much you can do on that kind of stuff. So you got to kind of throw some other things in there. But the one that happened last week was really interesting. I just the San Diego fire, San Diego plane crash, who died, who was injured, everything we know so far. This was a small passenger plane that just crashed in a residential neighborhood. Okay, it is really interesting. I mean, I don't even think that this video that we're watching right now even shows like the devastation that happened to this neighborhood. But there were 6 people on it. It was like a small little plane, and they all died. So, local and federal officials continue to probe a fatal May 22nd plane crash in the military housing neighborhood in San Diego. Also, it was in a military housing neighborhood.
And one of the people on board, if we're talking about the same crash, his name was Dave Shapiro. He was a big time music executive for Sound Talent Group. I think he was the co-founder of Sound Talent Group.
Yes.
And that, I mean, when there's a big name involved, that is ripe for conspiracy because maybe the guy was going to unveil something about child trafficking in Hollywood, and so they took the plane down. And it's much easier to just create that narrative and to sell that than it is to recognize that plane crashes happen all the time and that people die all the time, and that unless we know who the person is, unless they're running some big company, normally we don't care. Kind of like with the United Healthcare CEO. You know how many people get shot in Chicago and New York and Los Angeles and Baltimore every single freaking day?
A
But because
lot. Chicago has the highest crime rate and the highest rate of fatalities and shootings that are going unreported than anywhere in the United States.
a lot of shootings, but one person. In fact, I don't necessarily agree with the philosophy, that anarchist philosophy, but there's a really great line in the movie. I think it was the second, yeah, it was the second Batman movie from Christopher Nolan with the Joker with Heath Ledger. And he said, "Nobody panics when things go according to plan. If I say that tomorrow a truck full of soldiers will be blown up, nobody panics because that's all part of the plan. But if I say that one mayor will die, then everybody loses their minds." And that's exactly what we're talking about. One person, the United Healthcare shooter, has become a hero because he killed somebody. Uh, we've turned them into a cultural hero, a political hero, an economic hero, and the same thing with these plane crashes or with the train derailments. There are people that take these and they profit off of it. And I don't that, but again, that doesn't mean that I don't think that there couldn't be something suspicious in some cases, like the med jet that crashed in Philadelphia. That was really suspicious because reportedly there was somebody on board. It was a medical plane. Somebody on board, I think it was a little girl, and she was her family was drug cartel, and they think that the drug cartel took the plane down, or rival drug cartel. I had read that. I don't know if that's completely accurate or confirmed, but I mean that's a conspiracy. If you want a conspiracy, that's a conspiracy. Conspiring to take a plane down and kill a child to get back at somebody in the drug cartel industry. I mean, that's a pretty big conspiracy in the same way that, what happened with the Francis Scott Key Bridge and the eclipse and the NASA APEP program, that all went together really well. But again, there are things like this that happen all the time, and that doesn't mean that there's some grand conspiracy to them. We have to look at these things on a case by case basis and be a little bit more realistic about conspiracies and about stuff that just happens naturally.
I think that it was the UFO that took that plane down in Philadelphia, bro.
If
Them
that's what makes
UFOs,
you money,
dude.
if that's what makes you a lot of money, Absolutely.
The Cessna 550 slammed in the San Diego Murphy's Canyon neighborhood early Wednesday morning of the 22nd, May 22nd, sparking more than a dozen nearby car and house fires, sending plumes of smoke skyward, according to the information from the Federal Aviation Administration, National Transportation Safety Board, and San Diego police and officials. Emergency personnel immediately responded to the scene, extinguishing multiple fires and assisting residents with evacuations, police said. According to the FAA, 6 people were on board the private jet at the time of the incident. And they're trying to say that the reason that it crashed because it was super foggy. Now, if you remember, that's the same thing that they said with the Kobe Bryant helicopter crash that happened in, what was that, January of 2020? From Business Insider, this timeline shows everything we know and what we don't about the helicopter crash that killed Kobe Bryant, his daughter, and 8 other people. I'm pretty sure that they blamed the helicopter crash accident that killed all those people and killed Kobe
They did it
Bryant
with fog.
on the fog.
Yeah, and there were strange things about the Kobe Bryant crash because of the commercial that he was in with the helicopter that explodes because of the bomb
Here it
or
is, right here. Here it is. Here it is.
cartoon.
Crashed into a hillside after flying in heavy fog conditions at about 9:45 a.m. local time. It's the fog. It's the creepy frog. We were just talking about the fog that makes everybody sick. It's the killer fog, bro.
It crashes planes. I mean, that kind of stuff does happen. As a matter of fact, I wanted to mention one other thing about Kobe Bryant. The cartoon that showed the helicopter crash, and him with the trophies seemed to kind of predict his death along with that other commercial. But if we're talking about fog, I don't know if you recall this. You're from West Virginia. I'm from Florida, and I remember as a kid learning about the Sunshine Skyway bridge collapse back in the 80s. Have you ever heard about that incident? This massive bridge that collapsed?
Was that in Washington?
No, 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 it was in Florida.
Oh, it was
St.
in
Pete,
Florida.
Tampa,
No, no, I hadn't
St.
heard
Pete
of
area.
that. No.
I think it's where's the Sunshine Skyway? Southern St. Pete. It's south of St. Pete Beach. So if you look on a map or if you type into the computer Sunshine Skyway bridge collapse, the story was when I was a kid, and it was terrified people that it was early morning and there were people on the bridge and it was really foggy and there were buses of children going to school, or at least one bus of kids going to school, and cars, and this big boat takes out the support column in the fog. Some said the person was drunk, others said something different, and the cars plummeted into the water, the bus plummeted into the water. I mean, I grew up hearing that story and how scary it was, and there's a lot of bridges in Florida, especially if you lived in St. Pete, which is a peninsula, and then we lived on near the beach, so the beach is like some of it's artificial land built into the water, so it's like a peninsula on a peninsula on Florida itself is a peninsula. There's a lot of bridges everywhere you go down there. It was always scary to me because we heard these stories of the big bridge collapsed in the 80s. The thing is, though, when that bridge collapsed in the 80s, in fact, kind of like your big story in West Virginia, the Silver Bridge, the Mothman story, and they blame that on what was it, a bolt or a supporting component
Support
of the bridge.
beam malfunction, yeah.
32 or 33, I think was the number of it that malfunctioned. Uh, Same kind of a thing with this bridge. In this case, we had a boat that strikes it in the fog, and these cars collapse, and they say that was the main reason. And when they rebuilt the bridge, they rebuilt it, I think, in the late 80s with much better supporting um, structure, or much better engineering, and hopefully to even be able to withstand an accident like that. So even though it's a horrible thing that happens, and it happened because of fog and maybe the person was drunk, I don't know the whole story for sure. I've heard every angle of it, having lived in Florida most of my life. But regardless of what happened, the results can actually be positive because they built a better bridge and it's able to withstand, you know, those kinds of accidents, at least to some degree, in the same way that when there's massive earthquakes here in Japan, Japan's probably the most, and Tokyo specifically is the most prepared city for earthquakes in the world. They have the most advanced earthquake warning systems and preparation for those kinds of things to happen. So, like, something positive can come out of something very negative. That's, I think, a side note, but I think it's important to look at this story because this was in the 80s and there was fog and the boat hit the bridge. And guess what didn't happen in the 80s? There weren't a bunch of people on their phones sharing memes and videos and pictures and audio, things that are made up, things that are not made up, and spreading conspiracies about how the Illuminati took out the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. There just wasn't the platform for that. And today, everything that happens is that kind of a story. And I think that that contrast between the 80s and how the Sunshine Skyway incident, I mean, it scared people, but how it was handled as opposed to how things are handled today is a massive contrast difference. Back then, you didn't really have the kind of media you have today. Today, we have too much media. And back then, people didn't really think that everything was a conspiracy in the same way that they do today. So I just think that there needs to be balance, and I think that there needs to be more objectivity about this stuff, Ryder.
Okay, so this article is really confusing. It says up here at the top that 6 people died. Well, I guess it doesn't say 6 people died. Somewhere thought that it said 6 people died. Did I not read that?
Yeah, I read that. I have an AP article I just sent you over in the private chat.
Okay, well, yeah, these headlines are saying that 6 people died, and then down here it's saying that only 2 people died.
Maybe maybe it's, 2 people that the 2 people survived the crash and then die later, or does it just say 2
As
people
of
died?
May 23rd, officials have confirmed at least 2 fatalities in the crash.
Yeah, the article I have says 6. So that's another problem is that these places like the USA Today or AP or whatever it is, they wanna report ASAP. They wanna report first, and so they just report whatever, and then these stories end up changing because they don't have accurate information. Kinda like that prison break in Louisiana. That prison break in New Orleans, I heard 10, I heard 11.
Yeah, yeah, the
Oh,
same thing. I seen that as I was doing the show, as I was talking about it with Juan the other day. I was like, "It says 10, and then other ones say 11. Like, which is it? Why can they not get why can they not be accurate in their reporting? It makes 0 sense. Oh,
especially
8
for a
people
prison.
10 people escaped, 11 people escaped. Which is it? How many people died in this? Was it 6 people died in the plane crash, or was it 2 people that died in the plane crash? But Sound Talent Group music agency co-founded by Dave Shapiro confirmed the death of the 42-year-old talent agent in a statement to USA Today. Shapiro self-identified. So I guess they're saying that Shapiro was piloting the plane and he self-identified as an airport helicopter pilot. So he wasn't even a registered helicopter, uh, an air like a plane pilot. What are they trying to say in this article? That doesn't make any sense. Oh, well, yeah. As long as I identify as a helicopter and airplane pilot, then that makes me an airplane pilot. Makes 0 sense. This
On
thing
his
is ridiculous.
Instagram page.
Okay, let's open up the Instagram page. Let's take a little gander at this bad boy.
Does it say at the top
Music
there?
agent, airplane helicopter pilot. So he's a music agent and he doubles as an airplane helicopter pilot.
Self-identifying.
Self-identifying.
Well, that's
Okay.
what you want. You want a pilot who doesn't have any credentials, but they identify as a pilot.
2 other Sound Talent employees were also killed in the crash, including Daniel Williams, 39, who played drums for the Devil Wears Prada for the band from 2005 inception until 2016. I like the Devil Wears Prada. They
Did
were really
any of them live in Laurel Canyon?
No, they were all from Ohio. People magazine reported that Williams had posted images of the plane in its cockpit before the crash. The metalcore band paid tribute to Williams and Shapiro in an emotional May 22nd post shared on social media. Okay, how many people were on board? At least 6 people, including Shapiro and Williams, were on board the plane when it went down, FAA officials said. As of May 23rd, the identities of the other passengers were not immediately known. Officials had not released who piloted the plane.
So maybe that's why they only said 2 people died. They haven't confirmed the identities of the others.
Well, they're also saying that there was a recording, like a black box. Okay, the jet oh, no, I guess not. The jet was not equipped with a flight data recorder, he said. Investigators are working to determine whether the craft had a cockpit voice recorder or whether its engine had a flight recording ability.
It's kind of ironic that you have recording executives on a plane that doesn't have a recorder.
Coincidence, coincidence. Okay, let's look at this MSN article that you just sent.
This one says 6 at the top for you.
Okay, let's go over here. Where's the MSN? I just brought it over. I guess I gotta get rid of the screen share in order to be able to share it. This thing is wacky. Okay, present, share screen. What we know about the San Diego plane crash and the 6 on board who died. Okay, this shows a little bit more of the devastation there. Okay, killing 6 people on board, including groundbreaking alternative music executive Dave Shapiro. Is he related to Ben Shapiro?
He's related to the Star of David, I would assume.
Yeah. The crash stunned the heavy metal and rock scene as it grew out of the punk movement. The music agency that Shapiro co-founded, Sound Talent Group, represented groups like Pierce the Veil, Parkway Drive, Sum 41, and also venturing into more pop acts such as Vanessa Carlton. I
I
like
was
Sum
wondering if
41. I like
anybody
Parkway Drive too.
Yeah, I was wondering if anybody on the plane lived in Laurel Canyon.
I don't think so. A lot of the metalcore bands all came out of like Ohio, a large percentage of them.
Well, I'm talking about the music executives, though.
Oh,
Not
yeah, probably. Yeah, this is a lot of devastation, bro. Looks like this whole neighborhood was just wrecked.
It set fire to, I think it said 15 homes, 16 homes I had read, although who knows, 15, 12, 11, 100, who knows? There's always a counting problem when these stories happen.
Yeah, they can't even get their reporting accurate. It's crazy. The Federal Aviation Administration posted that an official noticed that the airport's runway lights were out. A pilot did not discuss that with the controller, but did say that he knew its weather alert systems were not working. Doesn't sound great, but we'll give it a go. Okay, yeah, let's just take this plane up without any of the runway lights on and without our weather control systems operating properly.
Well,
Let's
see,
just
that's
give it a go.
if the guy just self-identified as a pilot and there were conditions like that, then it makes sense that the plane probably didn't have a good chance of making it back down. If you don't have someone who's experienced and knows what they're doing, if you don't have runway lights, and if you're not necessarily sure um, how to, I guess, work the machine, even when there are appropriate conditions, then there's a pretty good chance you're gonna crash or something bad's going to happen. I don't think that that's part of a grander conspiracy.
And here it is. The fog was so thick around the time of the crash you could barely see in front of you. That was the assistant San Diego Fire Department chief that made that comment. But this brings up another one. This says the deadliest US had its deadliest plane crash in more than 23 years in January when the American Airlines passenger jet and an Army helicopter collided in Washington,
Mm.
killing all 67 people aboard the 2 aircraft. That was a pretty weird one.
That one I don't think
All
was
the
an
weird ones.
accident.
Yep. Last month, a sightseeing helicopter broke apart and crashed into the Hudson River. That was another really strange one. In
Yeah,
early February, a small commuter plane crashed in western Alaska, killing 10 people aboard. Okay. And then here's the Philadelphia one that you were just mentioning. It's kind of weird, dude. It's weird. I mean, again, we know we just went over that, crashes are down. There's just as many crashes as there's always been and less fatalities, but it's like, I don't know, dude.
it's
It's
the
weird.
reporting and the directionalizing of the public's attention to something like that. And it could be done for the same reason that the ultra extremist conspiracy theorists believe it's being done for. They believe that these planes or trains or whatever the case is are being intentionally crashed and people are being intentionally killed in order to convince the public not to fly or not to take modes of transportation. But you can do that by just exploiting accidents, which are normal and are actually statistically down. Stuff that happens all the time. You can exploit that and create a narrative around it. Maybe that's what's happening. Created a narrative to convince you that things are really, really bad when they're not really that bad. That's the problem with everything in the media. It's the same thing with I'll give you an example. I did a show Friday night about the Real ID, which has been in the works since 2005, and it finally has been implemented at airports as of May 7th. And it's supposed to be your only identification. If you don't have it, then you have to have a passport or tribal ID to get through security at the airport. And they tell people that you're not going to be able to fly. You have to have it. That's what the media says. But if you listen to what Christy Noem, the DHS secretary, says, or if you read the press release from the TSA, they actually say that you'll still be able to fly even if you don't have a real ID. You'll just maybe be subject to additional screening, maybe have to get in the second line, but you'll still be able to fly. But the narrative that the media created around the real ID is totally contrary to that. It's the same thing with masks. Even if the governor's order during the pandemic said you don't actually have to wear it, or if you call the health department and say, "Can they enforce this?" and the health department says, "No, no, 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 it's not a law. You can't force people to do that. It's all voluntary. It's a recommendation." Try arguing with the Walmart greeter. Try arguing with your manager at work. It's the same kind of a thing with these plane crashes. Even if you can try to explain what's happening and it's logical and makes sense, try explaining that to someone who's hell bent on selling a narrative, whether it's that nothing's happening or that everything's happening and the Illuminati's involved. I think people have just lost their collective damn minds across the board. I think that the public has been so brainwashed by propaganda and so misled by dis and misinformation that nobody knows what to think, nobody knows
Mhm.
how to think, and so they just choose whatever fantasy world is appealing to them, and that's where they choose to invest their energy. I mean, that's frankly just my opinion on the whole matter.
That's what it is. It's confusion. If you put out enough nonsense garbage and confuse people on it, what exactly that they're supposed to believe, then it doesn't matter exactly what's going on because you have everyone so confused that they're just their brains are every which direction. They no longer know what to believe because there's so much nonsense garbage out there.
I'll
And that
give
is
you another.
definitely a part of the problem. Is definitely a huge issue that but they love that, right? The government loves conspiracies. They're all on board with conspiracies now. They love it because guess what it does? It gives them the cover that they need to continue to do the real shit that they're doing.
Just like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s with UFOs, the military industrial complex benefited immensely from promulgating the UFO mythos because it was able to run a kind of cover story for their secret Cold War plane programs and Cold War uh, experiments. Not that there isn't something actually happening, but if you convince the public it's all just space aliens, well, then you can fly things right over their head, do it in public, and the public is just going to think that it's an alien invasion and not ask any questions, or they're not going to think anything of it because they've been told that that kind of thing doesn't exist. It's really weird. It's kind of like I'll give you another example I think is something that's relevant. the executive order that the White House just approved about pharmaceutical drugs. And CNN says new executive order is going to cut pharmaceutical drug costs by 80%. But that's not what it does. If you read it, and it doesn't matter if you support it or don't support it, but if you read it, it actually says it's going to strip all of, well, there's actually two of them. There's an executive order on pharmaceutical drug prices, and then there's an executive order from the White House, more of a directive about pharmaceutical manufacturing in the US. And both of them together, they don't cut drug prices. And the drug companies supposedly hate these executive orders, but they really benefit from them. If you actually read the order as opposed to what someone might say online on either side of the aisle, it actually strips all the regulations from the pharmaceutical manufacturers. It strips the manufacturing and the construction of new facilities, all the regulations for that. And then it cuts out the pharmacies and it cuts out the insurance companies as the middlemen and women between the company that sells the drug and the American consumer. In other words, it allows for the company to sell drugs directly to the American people with no doctor's note, no insurance, no pharmacy, just direct Pfizer to you, to your front door. And of course, Pfizer loves that. Why are they telling people the drug companies don't like that? It's not going to lower drug prices. It's going to give the drug companies an even bigger monopoly. It's just like everything that we're told. And if you try to explain that to somebody, like I had an argument with somebody where I screenshotted the actual executive order and showed it to them, and they tell me I'm a libtard. It's like you cannot converse with people about almost anything anymore, man. It doesn't matter what side of the political aisle or the UFO aisle. People are just hell bent on believing what they believe, and they don't give a damn about the truth or about critical thinking. It doesn't matter what the subject is. It's really demoralizing, honestly.
I really don't care about any of that because I'm never going to take another pharmaceutical drug ever again. And people are arguing about, oh, well, this is going to raise the prices. This is going to lower the prices. Who cares? It's poison.
It's
You're
all
putting
poison. Well, that's
poison
another thing
into
too,
your
is that
body, bro. Like, what are you talking about? Who cares how much it is or how little it is? You shouldn't be on it in the first place.
that's a great point. I did a whole show on that, as a matter of fact, and that's exactly the underlying issue, is that regardless of what something like that would do in terms of the price or in terms of selling directly to the public, I mean, okay, so there's a main law. It doesn't matter what the story is, but in that particular case, so you have the White House's opinion and their statement, which is that it's supposed to lower drug costs. The media covers that and says, okay, it's supposed to lower drug costs, but people need their drugs, so we got to make sure people get their drugs, and they just sell you what the company tells them to sell you. They pay for those advertisements that are considered news articles. And then you have people that look at it and say, well, whether it's a good thing or not, I need to have my drugs or I'm going to have problems. And then there are people like you and I who sit off to the side and say exactly what you just said. It doesn't matter. It's poison. And we spend the most money in the world. No country spends as much as the US does on drugs and healthcare. And yet we are the sickest in the world. And that also contributes, when you have a high demand, that also contributes to high drug costs because there's a high demand for those drugs. Of course, they're not going to be selling those drugs as much in countries like where I'm living now in Japan, because the population here is like 4% obese and relatively probably one of the healthiest in the world. So of course drugs aren't going to cost more here. That's just basic economics, supply and demand. And sure, there's exploitation of the American public and the American system, but again, like you just said, it's still poison, and we shouldn't be arguing about how much the poison costs. That idea you can apply to any subject. It doesn't really matter if the plane crash was natural or if the Illuminati brought the plane down. What matters is the optics of the story. The truth does not matter. It's as many have said before, it's a post-truth world, a post-fact world, at least in the US. And what matters is the emotional response and how the optics can be trained to trick your perception into believing whatever it is that somebody wants to sell you, whether they're selling you aliens or they're selling you drugs or they're selling you the New World Order or whatever it is.
And I'm going to put a caveat on that as well. Like, I'm personally not going to take any pharmaceutical drugs, but if pharmaceutical drugs help other people, then continue to do it. If you feel like that it is making a difference in your life, because sometimes I think I get it. I speak like other people shouldn't do it. Like that's your personal prerogative. Like if you're on medications that helps you, you believe that it helps you, then continue to take it. I'm not telling anybody what to do, but for me personally, I am not going to take any pharmaceutical drug ever again unless unless really need it. Unless I really need it, like I'm deathly sick or something, then I'll may possibly get an antibiotic. Who knows? There's always a
There's
caveat going on there. But when you're talking about these pharmaceutical companies and this stuff, I just made this post on Facebook here recently, and this is a chart which is a comparison of mental health prevalence and psychiatric treatment. Okay, so down here in 1950 was the lowest that it's ever been. And as we go on throughout the years, more treatments become available for psychiatric care, for mental health. More pharmaceuticals become available for psychiatric care and mental health. But yet, we get more mentally unwell people every single year since the year of 1950. Now, make that chart make sense.
well,
How does
obviously,
that work, Ryan? How do we have more care facilities for mental health? How do we have more treatments, more psychiatrists, more not parapsychiatrists, psychotherapists, more therapy centers, but yet we have been on a dramatic increase of mentally unwell people.
I mean, the obvious answer to that rhetorical question is that it's a business. So the more that you can take natural behaviors and emotions and classify them as some sort of disease or some kind of ailment or some kind of illness, the more that you can create, manufacture, and market and sell drugs and other forms of quote treatments for people. That's why you'll never see those numbers go down, because if they go down, then the psychiatrists, the psychotherapists, the psychologists, etc., they lose, just like cancer industry, or just like any other industry, vaccine industries, etc. They lose their cash cow. That's what it is. I mean, I'm telling you, if you look at the statistical data, kind of like what you're shown on the screen, if you look at the statistical data likewise, you could probably add a third line and compare that to violent crime, because in the United States, 80% of violent crime is not kind of linked to, it is directly linked to drug use, and not just illicit drug use, but drug use in general. So everything from your pharmaceuticals that you get legally to the drugs that you might buy on the street. 80% of America's crime problem is directly linked to drug use of one form or another. That's a major driving factor in crime. It's also a major driving factor in mental illness. As a matter of fact, you could look at the history of what is considered to be mental illness back before the 1950s, maybe going back 200, 300 years. And most cultures, most societies, going back even further than that, saw that when people were acting strange or bizarre, maybe they attributed that to alcohol. They were possessed by the spirit, the jinn, for example, or maybe they were crazy. They were mentally ill. They had like a legitimate problem, whatever that problem was. Well, they would still say that that person was possessed by a spirit. They were acting in a way that required an exorcism. And today, we do something very similar with exorcisms. We exorcise people with drugs and exorcise people with vaccines, except we're not basing it on one or two people in society that are acting kind of strange. We're creating the conditions so that everybody has this need for an exorcist like product. Everybody is potentially, like with ADD. What's ADD? Your kid likes to climb, likes shiny things, and it has a lot of energy. You just take natural human behaviors of children and adults. Are you happy? Are you sleepy? Do you have to go to the bathroom? Kind of like if you ever saw The Simpsons and the cat flu episode. You know, symptoms of the cat flu include mild hunger, being thirsty, being tired, just normal human experiences that they can label as a disease and then sell you a drug for it. So we have a lot of problems. One of the problems is the usage of the drugs. Another one of the problems is the labeling of natural behaviors as mental or physical illnesses that require drugs. I know that you're one of the few people that I'm either friends with or that who I consider a colleague who is willing to even discuss the fact that, like with the pharmaceutical drugs, it's just generally poison. And I think it should be obviously noted that some people, yes, it quote helps, but we have to consider that in America, we take more drugs than anybody else, and we are the sickest. So overall, clearly, the drugs are not helping us. They're making us sicker. They're driving that chart that's on the screen. They're making us more unhealthy in body and mind. And that can be statistically and even objectively verified by going to pretty much any other part of the world that does not use and abuse drugs like that. And I'm not talking just about Japan, although Japan's a great example because of how great the health is here in general. It's cultural, it's familial, it's community based, it's common sense based, it's portion controlled. And when you have the total opposite of that in drugs and food and alcohol and everything else, you get a population of very sick, mentally ill, brain dead people. And frankly, that's what the United States is. I'm an American citizen. I am ashamed of America, not because of wars necessarily or because of Trump or some stupid crap like that. I'm ashamed because my country is a nation of drug addicts. It's a nation of people that are sick and diseased and proud of it. And what I was getting at by saying that you're one of the very few people that I know as a friend or colleague who will talk about things like this, like the drugs. We still argue over things like viruses and bacteria. Yeah, like a bacteria can make you sick, but most of the time, what's making us sick, it's our diets, it's our lifestyles. It's the staring at plane crashes and thinking, I know the Illuminati did this because there's two wings on the plane, and two is one of the numbers the Illuminati likes. It's just like crazy mentally ill stuff. And it makes me feel just uncomfortable to watch it or to even talk about it anymore. I don't know what it's even become. It's mental illness across the board, but it's artificial. It's been manufactured because if you look at the rest of the world doesn't live and doesn't act like this. And those facts can be correlated directly with drug use, with diets, and with other similar things, including access to media and social media.
If I was a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, I would say that they are intentionally creating mentally ill people by reclassifying the parameters of what a mentally ill person is. Just like they try to reclassify everything else whenever it comes to their benefit. Okay. And we see that with the Adderall and the Ritalin that's given to children, which came directly out of the MK Ultra programs. Those that was tested on MK Ultra subjects before it was ever given to the public. Amphetamine. Okay, they were using that on MK Ultra test subjects before they ever gave it to the public. And then what did they do? They immediately roll it out to your kids. They get the kids hooked on it first. And that's what Yuri Bezmenov, his main thing, the KGB defector. I know I keep bringing him up, but it's so freaking important. And I've been ramming it into the ground, but it's really important because that's the whole basis of everything that he said is that if we control the school system, if we control the kids, if we control the information of what the kids are getting, then in 2 decades, we are going to have control of everything because those people grow up and the things that they are indoctrinated with, the things that they have normalized is going to become the new thing to do. And that is exactly what they done. They pumped communist ideas into young kids in school. Now those kids went to college, they propagated those ideas, and now those people that were in college in the 80s are now running the United States. They are in positions of power. And that's just the example that he gave. Communist, Marxist, Leninism ideas being pumped into the school systems.
I think there's a very real piece of information in what you said in relation to the plane crashes, because yes, plane crashes are down, and yes, people dying are statistically down. But where there are incidents, like with this guy in San Diego who I guess identified as a pilot and then crashed and didn't really know what he was doing, that kind of ignorance, that kind of arrogance and ego, that kind of just stupidity, quite frankly, that drives almost everything that we see, everything that we touch, everything that we hear. That's what social media is. That's what the mainstream media is. That's what politics are. At least in the United States, it's just a constant bombardment of the stupidest, dumbest, most absurd crap that humanity can produce. It's just mostly garbage, garbage in and garbage out. And so you have a largely a population of people who, I mean, this is all really scary. I think I mentioned this the last time I came on. In the United States, 70 roughly 79% of the country is literate. That means 21% of Americans, and sure, a large portion of that are people that have come to the country from places that don't have even moderate education systems. That's part of it, but that's not the entirety of it. That means 21% are not literate. And then of the 79% who are literate, up to 50% of the 79% can't read above a sixth grade level. And then the United States, above every other nation, depending on the drug we're talking about, the US is like first place in the usage and the distribution of like amphetamines, opioids, marijuana, and the list just goes on and on. There's the only country that comes close is like Germany and Australia for certain kinds of drugs. But when you look at Eastern Asia, like could be China, Japan, Taiwan, the usage of these kinds of substances or the distribution of them is like virtually nothing. It's like less than 1%. I think the highest I saw in one Asian country was 4%. And we're talking about the whole population. In the US, opioids are given out, I think it's 50 out of, I can't remember the exact number, it's like 50% of the United States of citizens are on opioids. That's like that's double the amount than any other country in the world. And that absolutely has something to do with what happened in Afghanistan with the poppy, the opium fields, and the Taliban and the US military, without a doubt. It's double the amount of that. I think it's depending on the country you compare it to. If you compare it to most Asian countries, it's like double or triple the amount of amphetamines. It's like double or triple the amount of marijuana. It's like double or triple the amount of virtually everything. Again, with the exception of some European countries or maybe Australia that are relatively comparable, but still not that comparable. So what I'm getting at here is if you have a country that has been sabotaged, you have people that can't read at all, or people that on average choose not to read and can't read above a certain level. People that on average, the US spends so much money on healthcare, and we are leading the world in categories we don't want to lead the world in: infant mortality, mother mortality, uh, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer. We're like the sickest and dumbest people on planet Earth. And it's no wonder why some people dislike Americans, because as the sickest, dumbest people on planet Earth, we run around telling everybody we're the healthiest and we're the most intelligent and America number one FU. It's not that I hate America. It's just that Americans need to realize that these problems are not universal. These problems are very centralized, and a part of that centralized problem, just like with UFOs. Yes, there's UFOs in Russia. Yes, there's UFOs in China, Japan, and all over the world. But like, as you know, Ryder, a lot of the UFO community makes the UFO issue a American issue. And outside of the borders of America, unless you're like a UFO historian, it like virtually doesn't exist. Maybe Rendlesham gets a mention, but it really just doesn't exist outside the borders of the country. I think that is a problem that that is a result of media. It's a result of politics, not just with, of course, UFOs, but a result of the drug use, the unhealthy lifestyles and diets, the corporate interest in government. All of these things contribute to these facts. There is a huge problem, and that problem is, it might sound completely unrelated to the plane crash problem, but I think it's directly related, because if you have a population that can't read, can't debate, doesn't have a diet or a lifestyle that is contributing to overall mental clarity and physical health, I mean, all of that eventually leads to somebody that you can show them the physical proof, and they don't, like, they physically, I don't think mentally have the capacity to understand it. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but man, there are some people that are like mega people that I've shown physical. They're like, that's not true. The executive order. I show it to them. I screenshot it, highlight it. You're just a libtard. And these are people I've known for a long time. And I'm thinking, not just some random person. I'm just thinking, like, I thought you were like an intelligent individual. Is it I don't know if it's stupidity, or I started thinking maybe they just don't even have the capacity to read it or to understand it. They would prefer to be in a cult. They would prefer to listen to whatever they're told and just believe it like the libtards do. Again, this is not a problem outside of the US and a lot of countries. It's a problem that we need to fix, and the only way we're gonna fix it is by bringing back real conversations like this, and by using critical thinking skills, and also I think we need to stop using the bite-sized, uh, bits of information that are out of context. We need to bring back long-form discussions and actually have debates where we can agree and disagree, and stop making everything about tribal warfare, and that includes the plane crash stuff too.
Well, that's the problem now, is that today's generation of people can't sit down because they don't have the attention span to even watch this
Yep.
hour-long video. So in order for me to get the attention of people, I have to cut these discussions down into 1-minute
Oh, yeah.
clips in hopes, Ryan, that they will click the link to the full video and listen to the entire thing, which a majority of them don't. Okay, but that is a major problem. I mean, then I get a lot of flack for the things that are not in the 1-minute clip. And I'm like, you realize this is just a minute clip of like an almost 2-hour long conversation that I
You didn't
had,
talk
right?
about something in the 1-minute clip because you cut it, so that means that you're covering it up, that kind of thing?
That's what they say. That's what they say. I've gotten so many of those comments like, "You didn't mention blah, 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 blah. You didn't say that this person was involved in that thing." And I'm like, "Bro, this is a 1-minute clip of a very long conversation that I had about this. If you would just click on the link that is attached to this clip, or if you take 5 seconds to go to the description or go to the link that's in the profile and go to my channel or listen to it on the podcast, you'll probably hear what you're trying to correct me on." I try and cover a lot, all my bases when I'm talking about something. But no, there it's just at you, at you, at you. But it's interesting that you bring up Germany and how Germany is probably one of the other countries that is on a lot of pharmaceutical medications, because Germany is where a lot of these medications originated from, was
Bayer.
Nazi Germany. A lot of them came from there, and they were tested on the Nazi soldiers of that time. And a lot of the pain medication that Hitler was on, well, it came from a doctor that he had, and then whenever they all got transferred through Project Paperclip in 19, I think that was in 1945 or 1947, around in that area, they then took that chemical compound. It was called something completely different, and then they took that chemical compound and then they made morphine in the United States based off of the concoction from Nazi Germany. I might be getting some of the story wrong there, but it was also like oxycodone. So they turned like that stuff into oxycodone, and then they sold it to the public. And but the Nazi Germany were doing all kinds of crazy stuff with drugs. They had one drug that was like a, it was like a freaking speedball, dude, that had like amphetamine in it, cocaine in it, the equivalent of like what we call oxycodone now, all like wrapped up into one. I think they called it like DXI or something like that. It's hard to remember off the top of my head, but they were doing it. And then we got those scientists, and then we started doing it here.
I've always I don't know if you want me to comment on that because I think I have a lot to say, but I've always wondered how I understand what you're saying, and it's certainly true. Much of this comes out of the drug companies, IG Farben, Bayer, etc. Um, IG Farben was even selected to be protected from Allied bombing during the final days of the war. They made sure the drug company was protected from the bombing raids. That's nice and convenient. Kill the civilians, but let's make sure the drug company's protected. But I've always thought that there was something like that happening in the 20s, and I was always wondering if in the 30s that hasn't been exaggerated in order to cover up what was happening in the 20s. And because the Nazis initially were highly opposed to all those kinds of things, they were trying to help the country recover from the devastation of the drugs and the prostitution, the pornography of the 1920s. And then all we hear about is the horrible, drugs that Hitler did, which he ended up being like a drug addict to some extent, to some degree. And they were certainly putting soldiers on those kinds of drugs on the front line. But I wonder if that's not kind of like the kamikaze story in Japan, where people think that the Japanese were just inherently kamikaze pilots. But what actually happened was that the Japanese resorted to kamikaze actions in limited cases toward the end of the war because they were out of resources, and they saw it at well some I'm sure there were some pilots that didn't agree with it or ran away, but most of them saw it as a national duty and an honorable thing to do that, to continue to defend Japan. It wasn't a national policy from the beginning. It was something that happened in the last days when the war was over. And I assume that that's probably what happened with the Germans too, that during the last days when it was pretty much over, that's when they really started pumping the tank operators and others full of these drugs. But then again, I also thought, well, hold on a second. We say that to kind of like vilify the Nazis, but then like the United States government, the Chinese government, even to this day, my God, look at the stuff China's doing, man. China's putting mRNA vaccines in soldiers. They're openly creating super soldiers in China. That's all over international news. They brag about it. Same thing
Are
in the
they time
US.
traveling? Can they time travel though?
We'll have to ask Corey Good. I'm not sure. That'll come out in the next disclosure project. But I mean, look at the United States. We did. In fact, I think there's an episode of the X Files based on the sleep deprivation and the super soldier program in Vietnam. It's like we did the same exact thing. So anyway, there's a whole show there, but I just think that in the 20s there was a major drug problem in Germany, and the US and China. Look at the stuff the Russians. My God, the Russians were cutting dogs' heads off and pumping it full of machines and tubes, and then keeping the dog's head alive. The whole stuff with the Nazis and drugs. I just think the door needs to be open there so we can see that it's the whole. It's like every government, every country, and we still do it today. And what the Japanese did with Unit 731, the biological experiments, which is crazy stuff that every country has done. And yeah, a lot of it is definitely centered in Germany, in the same way that a lot of companies still are today, and a lot of companies are centered in the US. And that's probably why the US and Germany have some of the highest uses, as you were saying, some of the highest uses of these substances. That we have like no regulation of the industry. We have regulators that regulate the law as opposed to regulating the companies that they're supposed to regulate, but that's a different story.
Yeah, I didn't like necessarily mean that nobody else was doing it. I just meant that like Germany created a lot of these drugs. I don't believe that methamphetamine was a thing before World War II and before they were given, and there definitely wasn't these other types of painkiller compounds. They didn't come out until like later. I don't know. I have to do more looking into it, but I believe, and that doesn't mean that the entire population of Germany was on drugs either. I mean, they could have just been, feeding it directly to their soldiers. But let's go over this. Before I let you go, let's do these train derailment stuff real quick because there was we've covered the boats, we covered the planes, we covered the helicopters. The first train derailment that I could remember, I don't know if you remember this one, but this was in 2022. where a former San Pedro train engineer was sentenced to 3 years in prison for
Intentionally derailed.
intentionally derailing a locomotive near the U.S. Navy hospital ship.
What was the reasoning given? Do you remember?
This was all around QAnon. This was a QE guy that he was trying to bring attention to the Mercy ship that was there for the
Oh,
COVID stuff, and he believed that there was children being rescued from the underground bases, and he wanted to bring attention to what was going on. So he tried to derail the train and crash it into the Mercy ship.
wow. I actually didn't I kind of remember hearing that in passing, but I don't remember anything about this story. That's the story, though, what you just said, that he was a Q person and he believed that he could help, I guess, free the children by derailing this train and crashing it.
That was what was told to me by his best friend that I
US
met in California during this time, that he thought that he was going to get charges put against him as well for this.
It's you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of back in the '90s when the FBI set up the first World Trade Center terrorist. The FBI used to, and they still do, most of the terrorist plots that are foiled are set up by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They always, well, essentially always have been. It's like 80, 90% or something. It's a crazy percentage. Most of them, three quarters of the base minimum. And I was talking about that on my show Friday as well, and in hearing what you just said about the QAnon thing, if that's actually true and that's actually accurate, then it looks like it's a new form of FBI entrapment, if you will, because instead of going and creating these terrorists and these lone gunmen and these lone bombers, etcetera, and training them and giving them weapons and telling them, oh, or telling them it's a test, and then the bomb actually goes off, whatever the case might be. I think that we've kind of evolved from that to being able to create people like this on the internet and being able to, like with Paul Benowitz, feed people information through their emails or through their social media or through their maybe even phone calls, but using something like QAnon to create individuals like this, like that crazy guy that went to the Planet Ping Pong Bing Bong pizza restaurant with a rifle and was going to help free the kids that Hillary Clinton was eating in the basement. Remember that guy? It's a very
Yeah.
similar thing to this. If that story is true of what you said, similar to this train derailment. It's like going back to the planes and the question of whether or not something suspicious is happening. Well, that is a suspicious thing. If the FBI or the CIA or the NSA or some other group or the Pentagon is behind creating these kinds of lone nuts based on these whacked out conspiracies of QAnon, then they're creating chaos. They're sabotaging airlines or trains. They're just not doing it in the traditional ways of how we might think they're doing it. They're doing it through proxies like the FBI always has with terrorists. Does that make any sense?
100% makes sense. And I believe that guy whenever he told me, because he was in fear of being prosecuted as well, because apparently he was the one that got this guy into the Q stuff. So he thought that the FBI was going to come after him because they were going to trace all of his information and his text messages and look at his computer and his social media and see where he got a lot of this information to be able to derail the train to hit the Mercy ship.
Yeah, that's
Or-
probably not easy.
Yeah, so I 100% believed him, and I remember I had heard a few other people talking about it after it had happened, but this one was kind of brushed under the rug. It didn't make national news. It was kind of only in California that this kind of hit the news, and then it was gone like within a week. It was gone. No one talked about it anymore. But I thought that that was an important one to bring up.
What was
And
the
then,
guy's
let's see if we can
name?
find it here. Eldrado. Moriano. I don't know if you
Moriano.
probably pronounced it
I probably
Moriano.
pronounced it better.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what his name was. I looked up the other guy, Edgar Madison Welsh is the guy that took the rifle to the, pizza place.
He caused almost $1 million in damages, $755,000 in damages. Yeah, that's a big one. And then of course, the Ohio train derailment here. Why is this not showing up? I hate when this happens. East Palestine train derailment, which happened in 2023. So I think it's about time for another train accident. What do you think? Haven't had
Maybe.
one in a couple of years.
You know what's a really kind of fun thing to do, Ryder? I would encourage all of your listeners to do this, encourage you to do it. I do it too. Look up plane crashes, train derailments, even boat accidents. Just look them up for random parts of the world. So, like, you could type in plane crash, train derailment, etc. in Russia, or do the same thing in Australia, or the same thing in, like, I don't know, the Philippines, and see how many stories you can find from different parts of the world that have no American media coverage, or like maybe very limited coverage. Just one story that is published and it disappears. It's like an AP wire or something. But look up those with those keywords and find, and I'm sure you can find a bunch of them. In fact, I know you can because I've done it, and how they're not being reported, and how if you did report them, it would make the if there was a conspiracy, it would make the conspiracy a lot more solid. But I think that because it's not being reported, it shows you an example of how in the US we cover these things so heavily to create narratives and optics. But listen, there's wildfires in South Korea. There's wildfires in Japan right now. There's like no news coverage of it. They handle it and it's done. There were some of the biggest wildfires South Korea ever had the last couple of months in terms of acres burned. There was South Korean media coverage, a couple stories here in Japan, but for the most, there was like no coverage of that in the US. And that's a favorite of ours, Ryder. I know because of the directed energy weapons. When there's a fire in Colorado or California, it's DEWs. When there's a fire in South Korea, it's nobody cares. And I just think we need to consider these things. Like there are train derailments in Russia, there are train derailments in Asia, there are train derailments in other parts of the world, and plane crashes. And it's funny how in those parts of the any other part of the world, it's just an accident, or maybe it's suspicious sometimes, but most of the time it's an accident or an act of God, an act of nature. But in the U.S., every fire is a DEW, every plane crash is the Illuminati, every train derailment is because of QAnon. It just seems weird to me when you contrast that with the rest of the world.
It is really strange, and there's no other explanation other than the government loves conspiracies. They've let it get so far out of hand that there's no putting a lid back on it, and they just got to roll with the freaking punches. Just like there's no putting a lid back on extraterrestrial life because they've let it get so far ridiculously out of hand, spreading so many rumors, misinformation, and disinformation that they can't go back on it now. So they kind of have to just roll with the punches and sort of double down on it, just
What
like
what
people do with their own beliefs on the internet. You show them
what do
facts
you
and
think then?
information opposing what they believe, they double down even harder on their regular position.
Yes. What do you think ultimately about the plane crashes and the trains and the boats? What do you personally think?
I think that they're doing something with making it a popular thing to to report on now. Now, what that reason why they would be doing that is a whole other uh, narrative. I don't know why they would be doing that, but it's kind of strange that all of a sudden, like these helicopter crashes, these plane crashes, these train derailments are very popular things to report on, and they last a long time in the news cycle. Besides the one that I just brought up, it was like a week, and it was like completely gone. But the real ID thing is completely ridiculous. They've been talking about the real ID for a really long time. That's been going on for like 10 years now. I've had a real ID for around 7 years because California required you to have a real ID. You couldn't get a different kind of ID. You can only get the real ID, and California was one of the first people to implement that policy. So I already knew that that's where it was going. So the whole thing that they don't want you to travel, they don't want you to fly, they don't want you to do all that is bogus if they're relating that to the real ID stuff. That has been in the making and in the works for a really long time. That was just going to be the way that it is. There's no getting around that. But I do think that it's just a tad strange that they're all of a sudden propping up and making these accidents on all accounts, besides a few of them, that's more interesting than just an accident. They're making these really big, like national stories, national wide stories. And it's just interesting to me. And fear obviously sells. I mean, there's nothing but fear on the news. That's the way that it's been since the 24-hour news cycle. It's just been nothing but fear. Hit people with fear, get them scared, get them confused, misreport a bunch of things. We just looked at the article where it said that 6 people were killed, and then later it said 2 people were killed. The article from the people that were escaping from the jail was 10 people. Other people said that it was 11 people. The Virginia Giuffre case had several speeds that the bus was going whenever it hit her vehicle. Some was reporting 80 miles per hour, some was 60 miles per hour, some was 40 miles per hour. The driver of the bus said that it was going like 30 miles per hour. Everyone had a different story when it comes to this stuff. So it's like it's fear and it's propaganda is what I think is going on. And for some reason, these types of stories of major incidents are being widely reported nationally now when there was probably the same amount of them that was happening before, but nobody cared because it wasn't reported on.
I think that we're relatively on this mostly on the same page. I think that they're creating a narrative or they're creating optics around it to make it seem that way. I mean, look at this story I just sent you. There's an incident in Russia of a train crash. Here is another one of a train crash. I just typed in train crash Russia, train crash Australia, train crash. You can find them all over the world, whether they're this year, last year, the year before. Like, how many people knew about the Russian train crash that happened last year? Like,
Nobody.
I didn't even know that until I just looked it up. Just there's always more context to this stuff, and we need to understand that context matters, and that we need to be a little less trigger happy on the extremist conspiracy stuff, because that plays right into the hands of the intelligence agencies and plays right into the hands of the media, the people that profit off of those types of narratives.
But they also have us in a double they can hit us with a double double with that too though, Ryan. They can the time that that everyone collectively decides that it's not a conspiracy is going to be when it's a real conspiracy, right? It's a flip flopping thing. They can go whichever direction they want to go with it because they have everyone exactly where they want them. So everything that people are seeing that is conspiracies, probably there's a another explanation to it. But then as soon as everyone says this isn't real, this isn't fake, I mean this isn't going, then it's the opposite because they can do that because they know what people. It's like if we were to release a like everybody wants the proof of extraterrestrials, right? Right? They want the smoking gun. They want the video of the aliens landing in the UFO landing and the aliens getting out. Okay, let's say someone had a real video of that. It was 100% legit, no CGI, the thing wasn't blurred, all real, no special effects, and they posted that online. How do you think people's gonna react?
Same way they react with anything else, it's fake.
That's right.
Well, I mean, there's a great example of that, I think, in the very, very, very famous Calvin UFO photo. I don't know if you know about the Calvin UFO photo. I can send you a link to it. This is considered one of the most credible UFO photos ever taken. It was just,
And
uh,
someone found it in
re
their desk, right?
I don't know if it was a desk or a box. I forget exactly where it was found, but it
Yeah,
was, a British journalist, David Clark, who
yeah.
found it, and, he'd worked as a curator for the National Archives in Britain, and he found this photo again. It was re-released. It's basically it shows an unidentified flying object, and there's a military craft near it. It's not the thing about photos like this, and I sent you the link in your private chat, is that there's no, like, big movement around it, like Louis Elizondo's fucking irrigation circle, and there's no big movement to discredit it, but it's just there. And these are the kinds of things that I think are probably a lot more accurate and true, but nobody really tries to prove it or discredit it. It just kind of sits there out in the open. Nobody recognizes, I guess, the value of it.
That's because when something is real, literally nobody cares about it. I mean, that's the exact same way that I felt about the UFO or the strange thing that I seen in my backyard with the military grade night vision goggles that look like a boomerang that I've showed on the show several times that I 100% seen it. It's not a doctored video. I seen it with my own eyes, captured it on military grade night vision goggles, but no one gives a shit about that.
Come on. George Norrie doesn't want to have you on Coast to Coast to talk about that photo. Come on.
He
Talk about
should.
that.
Everyone should be all over it. I don't know what it is. It's a freaking boomerang flying through the sky.
No,
A
it's
giant
crazy
boomerang.
because I don't wanna use on your show name specific names, but, you have to struggle to get access to go to a UFO conference when you have something like that, but people that make crap up get first class, first rate tickets and access. It's just so ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, and that's the thing is that whenever something real happens, people are not they don't know the difference because there's so much fake nonsense garbage out there, and this idea that everything is fake and everything is, staged and everything is a play and not taking thing like you mentioned in earlier in this episode, everything should be analyzed and scrutinized on a case by case basis.
Yeah, but
And
you all you of course don't wanna get do that kind of thing to the extent that you lose all touch with the possibility of something extraordinary. You always have to try to maintain that middle ground when you're doing that. I know you saw that picture of Louis Elizondo's, UFO, and he even admitted that he didn't vet the guy. He admitted that he didn't have any evidence the photo was real. He just shared it and then doubled down on the photo. And it's, like, clearly an irrigation circle, and somebody even on the internet even went to Google Maps and found it, and then took it and compared it to his photo, which had been blown out, and the contrast and whatnot had been changed on it to make it look like it was an actual shadow of a craft. Like, so fake that even some of the UFO people that support Louis Elizondo were like, "Man, what are you doing? This picture is this is, like, faker than CG. It's horrible." And that kind of thing is what gets attention. I call it you call it conspiracy capitalism in a way. It's just profiteering off of people's willingness or unwillingness to believe something, which is why I think that ultimately deep down, the people that want disclosure, just as an example, people who want disclosure the least, I think are the people that are pushing for disclosure. Because if you get quote disclosure, suddenly Jeremy Corbell isn't walking through conferences with 5 camera angles on him. He's not as popular because he's not the focal point of getting disclosure. Once you get it, he's just another name. Once you get it, he's not important anymore. Same with Stephen Greer. If you get disclosure, well, then everybody knows about the aliens now. You don't need to buy a $5,000 laser to talk to the aliens. The government can do it. Everybody can do it. That's the problem, is that nobody ultimately wants within those fields or communities there to be some revelation of the truth. I think it's the same thing with the trains and planes. You can show people the statistical data, but people are profiting off of the conspiracy, whether it's financial or it's energetic. I think more so in the case of government and agencies.
I would agree with that very heavily. I think that that is exactly what's going on. I mean, if you take away the boogeyman, if you take away the mystical aspect and the belief, and then everybody has access to it. I mean, that goes back to like the church, right? Used to be that priests and bishops and cardinals and these people were the only ones that had access to God. Okay, you didn't have access to God. So you got to pay me money so I can communicate with God on your behalf. Hey, when the Bible says something completely different than that. And the Bible says that we can all communicate with God, but nobody thought that they could. So then they just kept giving their money to these bishops and priests and stuff so that they can communicate with God. It's the exact same
Right here.
type of way with what's going on within the community. Like these certain people are the ones that has all the information. They're the only ones that has the right information. And if you don't listen to them, then you're a part of the problem.
Then you find out some of those people that are on social media that are the big accounts, the people that are could be right wing as much as left wing. Turns out they're being paid by soda companies, or they're being paid by foreign countries. Like, my God, Tim Pool met with Benjamin Netanyahu. Are you kidding me? These are influencers. These are commentators meeting with world leaders, being paid by soda companies to promote soda and not have it stripped from the SNAP program. It's just a giant joke. I know how much you struggle. You put in so much time and effort making, your clips or making videos, and I see that, yes, sometimes you'll have a couple thousand things here or there, but these people don't have to do anything. They could post a picture of their toe, and they'd have 50,000 people that liked it, and they'd get $1 million in donations because there's something cryptic about the toenail. It's just so stupid. It's so stupid. It's scripted. It's all paid for. It's organized. None of these people are real, including the big conspiracy people. They're not real. And if they ever were real, the narrative has shifted, changed. Goalposts have been moved.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Yep. I think that you hit the nail on the head. I'm going to be posting toe photos from now on, right? I'm going to give me some nice old toe
And
photos.
that's how Marina Seren makes her money. She's a foot princess on OnlyFans. Foot princess.
Give me that UFO cash, baby.
Yes. That's where the money is. But hey, again, all those things relate back to the train and the plane and the boats, because those stories are handled in the same way that the UFO stories are handled. They're handled in the same way that any other conspiracy is handled. I mean, my God, I just one other example is it's like the Joe Biden stuff. Suddenly now there's books being written. He had an illness. He wasn't all there in the head during his presidency, and they were building fake sets for him so that he could take the COVID shot. We knew that anyway. They were building fake sets so that he could have town halls that nobody showed up to, and like that's just mainstream news now. But if I said that 6 months ago, banned, censored, kicked off, demonetized, etc., but now it's on CNN, and now but what gets me about it is that there's like no rebellion from the general public. The people that denied that was happening just kind of ignore the fact that now they're being told that it was real. He was sick the whole time. They used the auto pin. They had a fake White House set. They had a fake town hall set, like a Hollywood set. It was all a joke.
Do you remember before the election, whenever the White House officials came out and said that Biden was sharp as a tack, that he's sharper than he's ever been before?
Yeah, I've never. This is prime Biden.
Prime Biden, prime. Whenever he fumbled through the freaking the 2020 debates. If you didn't realize that something was wrong with him in the 2020 debates, and then he was president anyway.
It's amazing. You sit and you say those things to people because you're watching reality, and they just refuse to believe it. And then after all these years, none of those people come back and say, "Wow, you were right." It's classic misdirection across the board, in every issue, every subject. And again, even something like UFOs. Look at that Calvine photo. How many people have ever seen that compared to the nonsense that Louis Elizondo has put on the internet in the last month?
Or the Nimitz or the Tic Tac. Yeah.
There's another thing. Yeah, you hear those stories over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. I mean, my God, how much stuff does that and how long ago were those videos actually taken? A long time ago, more than a decade ago, I think, in at least the Tic Tac case. What about literally thousands of available, not to mention probably hundreds of thousands that you could dig for or have FOIA requests for, of documents after documents after documents. Like, I'm not saying I believe everything he wrote, but read a book by Timothy Good. Read his book Top Secret. He pulled records from like military archives all over the world, going back to the freaking 30s. It's every country has massive records of this stuff that you can get access to that he prints in the book. It's not a new book either, it's an older book. And they're just the file's just right there. And it's like I remember when the 2017 thing happened with ATIP, and I had read just one of many books I've read on UFOs, but I read Timothy Good's book, and I'm sitting there literally, Ryder, I'm reading the article, and I was thinking, "Wait a minute." And I got the Timothy Good book, and I'm holding it in my hand, and I'm like, there are hundreds of documents just in this book alone. And then there's this ATIP article, and suddenly everybody's talking about UFOs. I bought this book for $9 at a used bookstore, and it's all like official records from the US and South America, etc., and Russia. I'm like, what? I got this article from the New York Times, or I've got the actual records, and they're telling us in the New York Times it's like one program, and then there's like some tic tacs or something. But here's all the records. So like the camera's on this, but the records are over here. And they keep telling people about the Tic Tacs. It's like there's so much more stuff that it's just totally available. You can get access to it everywhere. It's the same thing with healthcare. You can't sell sleep more, drink more water, and eat basics, even if they're conventional, just standard, basic, simple foods. You can't sell that. There's not a broccoli lobby. There's a tobacco lobby. There's not an asparagus lobby, but there's a cigarette and an alcohol and a sugar and a meat and a this and a that lobby. It's just wholly corrupt to the core.
It is 100%. And I don't know how we're going to get out of it, but I hope that we do. I got my fingers crossed. Everyone should have their fingers crossed, and we all should be just doing better individually. We should be trying to better ourselves and better our health individually. And then hopefully that rubs off onto more people, and then we get a healthier population to where we're not constantly bombarded by all of the nonsense garbage, and off of the medications as much as we possibly can. And I think that we would see things start to heal up. But Ryan, thanks so much for coming on, brother. Really appreciate you. Can you let people know where to find you online?
Yep, my website is tstradio.info. That has the full archive. It is totally free. There are links to listen on different apps if you prefer that as opposed to the website. There are ads in the show, so if you'd like to get the ad-free version, that's also on the website. You'll get access to a lot more than just the show, though, if you subscribe. Access to my books as well. Again, it's tstradio.info. The email is rdgable@yahoo.com. And as well, the YouTube, the X, and the Facebook links are on the website. When you look at them and you see X has like 1,000 followers or something, people have asked me, why don't you have more followers? You've done this 15 years. Well, it's because I've been kicked off of Twitter like multiple times, and I've been kicked off YouTube. So I don't really have much of a social media presence because of that. And I don't like investing a lot of time in something that can just be stripped away so easily. But if you want to find the show, The links are there on the website, tstradio.info. Ryder, thanks for having me on. I hope that the conversation went well for you and the audience enjoyed.
Hey man, I only have like 875 followers on X and I've had it for 5 years and I don't even haven't even broke 1,000 friends on Facebook. I've also had it for 5 years. So
And maybe you should share irrigation circles that you took pictures of. Actually, that irrigation circle's in Colorado. Maybe you could check it out the next time you visit Colorado.
I
You'll
will. I'll
meet
go
the
take
aliens there.
get some pictures of that underground base. That's really a sewage drainage pipe. All right,
Yeah.
brother. Thanks so much for coming on. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel and the algorithm. Sure, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.